Daniel Miller was the compound's famously devoted husband, taking impeccable care of the entire family, young and old alike. Married to director Sarah Vance for 7 years, he had always been the model of a dutiful spouse. But Daniel never imagined in his wildest dreams that the son his wife, Sarah, had carried for 9 months, 5-year-old Ethan Vance, was not his child. When he confronted her, Sarah confessed without hesitation that the child was hers with another man. "My child is your child," she told him. "You will continue to raise him, and your place by my side will remain yours." Daniel couldn't accept it. He asked for a divorce 3 times, and Sarah refused him every single time. To prevent him from leaving, she even put in a leave request at his job without his knowledge and locked him in their house. The day his spot in the prestigious study abroad program was finalized, Daniel grabbed his letter of recommendation and, with the help of his best friend Michael Carter, fled to the airport. Daniel was just a step away from the jet bridge when Sarah arrived and blocked him at the aircraft door. The plane took off. Daniel's escape had failed. His eyes red with tears, he demanded to know why Sarah had deceived him for so many years and still refused to let him go. Sarah's gaze flickered over his devastated form before landing on Michael, who was standing nearby. "Michael, I know you're kind and wanted to let him go, but if he leaves, who'll be here to take care of our family for you?" She nestled into Michael's embrace. "Your time is too valuable to be wasted on domestic chores. Have you forgotten that your dream is to dedicate your life to research?" Michael looked conflicted. "But Daniel is my best friend. I can't just ignore what he wants. I already owe him so much." Sarah looked at him with a soft expression. "You gave him your place by my side. Without the Vance family support, he'd just be some poor kid with nothing. You don't owe him a thing." Daniel froze completely. He had never seen Sarah be so tender with anyone. As the only woman on the Southern Command's leadership council, she was known for being even more iron-willed than her male counterparts. Though their house in the compound was a short drive from a base, she was rarely home, spending most of her time with her unit. To her, duty always came first. As a military spouse, Daniel completely understood. He tirelessly cared for her aging parents and raised their son almost entirely on his own. A month ago, Ethan had taken a bad fall at school, nicking an artery. He was bleeding profusely and in desperate need of a transfusion. Without a moment's hesitation, Daniel offered his own arm. But the hospital said Ethan's blood was type B. Daniel froze on the spot. How is that possible? He was type A and Sarah was type O. There was no way their son could be type B. In the end, it was Michael who rushed over, pulled some strings, and secured the blood that saved Ethan's life. Daniel, shaken, confided in Michael about the blood type discrepancy right then and there. He never imagined that the man he considered his best friend had been conspiring with his wife to deceive him for 7 years. Daniel felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. He clenched his jaw, so hard his voice seemed to vanish. He opened his mouth to speak several times, but no words came out. Finally, filled with utter disappointment, he asked, "Michael, how did it feel watching me play the fool for you 2 all these years, while pretending to be my best friend?" Michael looked at him apologetically. "It's my fault. Sarah had nothing to do with it. If you're angry at anyone, be angry at me." Daniel finally snapped. He lunged forward, intending to rip that hypocritical mask off Michael's face. But before he could land a single blow, he was roughly seized and held back. "Take him home," Sarah commanded coldly. Daniel was once again a prisoner in his own house. When Ethan got home from school, he saw his father's miserable state and said, "Dad, why do you always look so pathetic?" He tossed his backpack aside and whined that he was hungry. Sarah's parents emerged from their room, coddling Ethan while berating Daniel. "What is wrong with you, Daniel? Ethan is hungry. Why aren't you making dinner? Why the long face all day? It's not like we're dead yet." As he spoke, Mr. Vance slipped off his shoe and hurled it at Daniel, the dirty sole leaving a smudge on his temple. Ethan giggled and clapped his hands. "Daddy's so silly, but I want a daddy like this. Grandpa, can Uncle Michael be my dad? I like him better." Daniel's heart felt like it was being sawed apart with a dull blade. It wasn't a fatal wound, but the pain made it hard to breathe. Even though the boy wasn't his, he had raised him with all the love he would have given his own son. Seeing that he still hadn't moved, Mrs. Vance snapped. "What? You're tired of waiting on us old folks? Is that it? Get in there and cook for my precious grandson." As Daniel looked at the 3 of them, the light in his eyes slowly faded. He squeezed his eyes shut, let out a long breath, and walked silently into the kitchen. After dinner, the grandparents and grandson went for a walk, holding hands. Daniel wasn't allowed to leave. One of Sarah's guards was posted at the door with orders that he couldn't go anywhere until the director came back. Daniel didn't argue. He went back to his room, pulled an old cookie tin from the depths of his closet, and took out a slightly yellowed slip of paper. He dialed the number written on it. "Sir, hello. I'm calling to accept the offer to have my identity erased and join the classified research project." The project director had approached Daniel about a year ago, but he had declined. The man on the other end of the line was clearly pleased. "Daniel, my friend, I knew you'd come around. I knew you'd be willing to contribute to our nation's scientific advancement. We're a top-secret program, so the circumstances are unique. In 1 month, I'll send someone to come get you." Daniel replied quietly, "Understood." As he hung up the phone, he turned and saw Sarah standing there. She stood there silently, her eyes dark pools, and asked in a low voice, "Who was that on the phone?" Daniel's heart seized. He had no idea when she'd gotten home, how long she'd been standing there, or if she'd overheard. All he knew for certain was that she would never let him leave. Daniel clasped his hands behind his back, his fists tightening without him realizing it. "You put in for too much time off for me," he said. "My supervisor at the lab says I need to come back." He watched her face intently, and she seemed to believe him, dropping the subject. It was Sarah's first time home since the airport incident. Perhaps she had realized that keeping him locked up wasn't a sustainable solution. "Just behave yourself, and don't try any more stunts. You could go back to work tomorrow," she said. "With you gone these last few days, Michael has been working himself to the bone at the lab." Daniel's fists were clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. He fought to keep his composure, but finally broke. "If you love Michael so much, why won't you divorce me? Why lie to me for all these years?" He thought he could stay strong, but he felt his eyes welling up with tears. Sarah's voice was grave. "Michael's dream is his research. He isn't suited for caretaking. You know my family situation. When we got married, you promised you would take care of them for me. So, because Michael needed to focus on his career, she had married Daniel to be a free caretaker." Daniel closed his eyes, methodically erasing any last shred of affection he had for her. "You can have your job, as long as you take care of everyone at home," Sarah said, her voice devoid of warmth. "The prestige of being the director's husband can be yours for as long as you want it." Daniel understood. He wouldn't waste any more energy wondering why. After so many failed attempts to leave, he knew better than to announce his plans. This time will be different. He just nodded and gave a quiet sound of agreement. Sarah sensed a shift in him, but couldn't place it. As long as he promised to behave, that was all that mattered. Still, watching him, a strange unease settled in her gut. "I know how you feel about me," she said, "but I gave my heart to Michael a long time ago. I truly am sorry." With that, she turned and left. "I'm heading back to the base." Throughout their marriage, Sarah had spent most of her nights in the barracks. Even though it was only a 30-minute drive from the base to their house, she rarely came home on weeknights. Daniel had always assumed she was just dedicated to her job. Now he knew she was just keeping her distance for Michael's sake. Daniel looked away. He didn't wait up for Ethan to remind him to brush his teeth like he usually did. Instead, he just went to his own room to rest. When the grandparents and grandson returned from their walk, the house was silent. Mr. Vance thumped his cane on the floor a few times. When Daniel didn't appear, he began to curse under his breath, his temper flaring. "This is outrageous. Can't even criticize him anymore. It's clear he has no respect for me." Mrs. Vance ushered Ethan back to her room, saying, "Sweetheart, your useless father is getting a temper. You don't need to worry about respecting him anymore. Just be good to your grandma and grandpa." Their words drifted through the closed door. Daniel lay in bed, staring blankly at the dark ceiling. It seemed that in all the years he had dedicated to this family, not once had anyone shown an ounce of gratitude. The next morning, Daniel was the first one up as always. Out of habit, he started making breakfast for everyone. Ethan came out of his room, saw the breakfast on the table, and immediately started complaining. "I don't want this. Dad, is this all you know how to make? You're so useless. Uncle Michael isn't like you. If he was my dad, we could eat out every day." Daniel kept eating, his face impassive. He used to coax the boy to eat, but he wasn't going to do that anymore. "Then go find someone else to be your dad," he said flatly. "Eat it or don't. I don't care." Ethan was stunned. Daniel had never spoken to him like that before, and he stood by the table, unsure what to do. The next second, he saw his grandparents emerge from their room and immediately burst into crocodile tears. "Mean Daddy. Daddy said he doesn't want me anymore." Mr. Vance cleared his throat with a gravelly noise. "Scaring my grandson first thing in the morning. Don't you bring your attitude from the outside into this house." When Mrs. Vance saw that Daniel was still sitting there, making no move to apologize, she screeched, "I'm telling Sarah. I'll have her divorce you. You miserable curse." Daniel ignored them completely. When he finished his meal, he simply got up and left for work, with Sarah's enraged parents trailing behind him, shouting insults. He could still hear their shrieking voices even after he'd walked out the main gate of the compound. When Daniel got to the lab, Michael was surrounded by their colleagues. "Michael, that's incredible. A fully funded research fellowship abroad. Most of us can only dream of that." Another said, "Congratulations on getting accepted into the exchange program." Michael smiled, accepting their good wishes, but his smile faltered for a second when he saw Daniel in the doorway. Everyone in the lab knew Daniel had given up his spot in the program, which is why Michael had gotten it instead. What they didn't know was that Daniel had been stopped by his powerful wife just moments before he was about to board the plane. Michael glanced nervously at Daniel. When Daniel remained silent, Michael breathed a sigh of relief. After the others had dispersed, Michael approached Daniel's desk and murmured an apology. "Daniel, I'm sorry. Sarah said you couldn't leave the country, and it seemed like a waste to let the fellowship go, so she arranged for the director to give it to me." Daniel looked him straight in the eye and gave a bitter, humorless smile. "Michael, you planned this from the start, didn't you? So why act so innocent?" Every time Daniel thought about the years of lies from Michael and Sarah, a fresh wave of rage washed over him. I only kept it a secret because I knew how much you cared for Sarah," Michael said, his voice earnest. "I was trying to protect you. Besides, you're the one who got to marry her. What more could you possibly want?" Daniel had never realized Michael could be this shameless. He truly seemed to believe he had done nothing wrong. As Michael spoke, his eyes landed on the notebook in Daniel's hands. It contained 6 months of Daniel's painstaking experimental data. Michael suddenly snatched it, flicking through the pages with a greedy glint in his eye. "Well, since you aren't going abroad anymore, this will be very useful for me. I'll just take it. Were you a thief?" "Give it back," Daniel demanded, reaching for his notebook. As his hand shot out, a calculating look appeared in Michael's eyes. He quickly stepped backward, deliberately bumping into the corner of a desk, and collapsed to the floor with a cry of pain. Michael was taken to the hospital, and Daniel, facing a barrage of accusations from his co-workers, went along. They had only been there a few minutes when Sarah burst in, looking frantic. She strode directly up to Daniel and slapped him hard across the face, splitting his lip. "Direct your anger at me, but if you ever dare to touch a single hair on Michael's head again, I will make you regret it." Sarah's lips were moving, but Daniel couldn't hear her words. A sharp ringing filled one of his ears. Clutching his head, his face ashen, he fell to the floor. The last thing he saw before blacking out was Sarah's face, her expression a mask of panic. When Daniel awoke, a throbbing pain pounded in his temples, so intense he wanted to slam his fists against the bed. Sarah's voice was low. "Don't move. You've damaged your ear." Daniel could only make out muffled noises, and the persistent ringing in his ear was agonizing. For the first time, he saw a flicker of guilt in Sarah's eyes. She helped him sit up. "The doctor said it should get better with a few days' rest. Don't worry. I'll stay here and take care of you." She hadn't even finished her sentence when the door to the room banged open, slamming against the wall. Michael stood in the doorway, staring. "You too." Sarah instantly pulled her hand away from Daniel. "Michael, it's not what you think," she said quickly. "I'm not misunderstanding anything. I heard you say you were going to stay with him," Michael demanded. "Have you forgotten what you promised me?" "No, I haven't, but it's my fault he's hurt. I hit him without knowing the whole story," Sarah explained frantically, but Michael wasn't listening. "So you're blaming me for this? Is he more important to you than I am?" "Of course not," Sarah retorted. "How could he possibly compare to you? You know he's nothing more than a glorified housekeeper to me." Daniel's head was spinning. The sight of them embracing right in front of him was like a physical blow, and their sickening words mingled with the ringing in his ears. He blindly grabbed an apple from the nightstand and threw it at them. "Get out. Both of you, just get out." Sarah saw the apple coming and quickly moved to shield Michael with her own body. Michael looked at her with concern, then turned on Daniel. "How dare you throw something at her?" Sarah held him back. "Let it go, Michael. I'm the one who wronged him." Michael pushed her away. "And you still claim you don't have feelings for him? Fine. You stay here and take care of him. I'm leaving." He stormed out of the room. Without a moment's hesitation, Sarah ran after him. She didn't spare Daniel a single glance as she left. She didn't see the 4 needle that had slipped from his hand, nor the crimson drops of blood that fell from his fingertips to the floor. In the days that followed, Sarah never came back to the hospital. During rounds the next day, the doctor suggested, "Given your condition, you really should have your wife come stay with you." Daniel's hearing was still muffled, and a nurse had to repeat the doctor's words for him. He answered calmly, "My wife is dead." As far as he was concerned, Sarah being alive was no different than if she were dead. The mere thought of her left him numb. The day he was discharged, he went home by himself. The moment he walked through the door, his foot caught on something and he went sprawling onto the floor. "Ha ha ha, you big dummy." Ethan's laughter rang out. "Daddy's so clumsy," he fell right over. Daniel pushed himself up and looked at Ethan, who was now bouncing on the sofa cushions. The boy was laughing, showing no sign of remorse or guilt. For the first time, Daniel felt a deep conviction that the child was rotten. He used to tell himself that Ethan was just young, that with patient guidance, he could teach him to be a good person. But now he wondered if it was hopeless. A bad seed only grows a bad weed. Maybe the boy was just born mean. Daniel picked up a broom from the corner and began sweeping all the scattered toys directly into the trash can. Ethan immediately started wailing. Michael emerged from one of the rooms, scooping the boy into his arms and comforting him. "What happened? What did you do to make your daddy so angry?" Daniel was shocked to see Michael. "What are you doing here?" Michael, still patting Ethan's back, replied, "Sarah said you weren't here and asked me to come check on the boy." Ethan wrapped his arms around Michael's neck and glared at Daniel. "You're mean. Why are you so mean to Uncle Michael? I don't like you. I want Uncle Michael to be my dad." A bitter smile touched Daniel's lips. "I'm not your dad. What is all this commotion?" "Ethan, what did you do now?" Sarah asked as she walked in the door. She stopped short when she saw Daniel. "Why didn't you tell me you were being discharged? I would have come to get you." Her arm brushed against his, and he quietly stepped away. She noticed his retreat and frowned. But before she could say anything, Ethan started crying again. "Mommy, I didn't do anything. Daddy said he doesn't want me anymore." Michael hugged him tighter, looking at Sarah with a pained expression. Is this how Daniel normally treats him? Sarah couldn't stand seeing Michael look upset. She turned to Daniel and snapped, "He's just a child. How could you frighten him like that?" Daniel had lived in this house for 8 years, but only now did he truly understand that there had never been a place for him here. Looking at the perfect picture they made, a family of 3, he saw there was no room for him. Daniel said nothing, simply walking around them to head upstairs, but Sarah stopped him. "You need to come with me to pick up my parents from the convalescent home. Now that you're back, you can look after them again." Daniel let out a laugh born of sheer disbelief and anger. "Sarah, your shamelessness knows no bounds. You traded a marriage license for a lifetime of free labor. I don't want it. Give it to Michael. It's perfect, since your son is so desperate to be with his real father anyway." Ethan was too young to understand, but the color drained from Michael's face. Sarah gently patted Michael's arm. "The car's out front. Why don't you take Ethan over to your place for a bit?" Michael's expression was grim, but he swallowed whatever he was about to say and carried the boy outside. Once she heard the car start, Sarah closed the front door and slowly advanced on Daniel. "I told you never to say things like that in front of the boy. You are my husband, and you are his father. That will never change." Daniel laughed, a cold, empty sound. "Sarah, you make me sick." "Sick?" A cruel light flashed in her eyes. She seized his wrist and dragged him toward the bedroom. "Let me go." Daniel tried to pry her fingers off, but she shoved him onto the bed. "How could you be disgusted?" "You know you want this," she hissed, pinning him down and ripping at his shirt, forcing herself on him. Daniel struggled violently, managing to roll over and shove her off him. She hit the floor with a soft cry of pain. "It hurts," she whimpered. Something was wrong. Daniel froze, his eyes catching a spreading stain of blood on the comforter. In a panic, he scooped her into his arms and ran out the door. Sarah was pregnant. After a moment of shock, a flicker of joy appeared in her eyes. The doctor was explaining the necessary precautions to Daniel, but his mind was completely blank. Daniel looked down at Sarah. Her hand rested on her stomach, a smile playing on her lips. The timing couldn't be worse, but a part of Daniel desperately wanted this baby. He had raised another man's child for 5 years. Now, finally, he might have a child of his own. After the doctor left, a heavy silence filled the room. Daniel just stared at Sarah. "Daniel," she said softly, "we're having another baby. What happened was my fault. The doctor said we need to be very careful for the first trimester." Noticing his pale expression, she got up and poured him a glass of water, making sure it was the perfect temperature before offering it to him. Daniel took the cup, not wanting her to feed him. "This baby," he started, his voice raspy, but he was cut off by the arrival of Michael. "Sarah, you promised you wouldn't sleep with him," Michael accused, standing in the doorway. "You said this whole marriage was just a cover so I could focus on my work. You said Ethan would be your only child. Did any of that mean anything?" Michael's tone was ice cold. Sarah shot to her feet, the legs of her chair screeching against the tile floor. She reached for his hand, but he slapped it away violently. "You made me a promise, and you're going to keep it. You can't have this baby." Michael's face was a cold mask, his friendly facade gone. He pointed at Daniel. "It's him or me." With that, he turned and fled. Sarah started to go after him, but then stopped. "Michael is just in shock," she said, turning back to Daniel. "Don't hold it against him. I'm keeping the baby." But Daniel no longer had any hope for her. It didn't matter to him what she did. If she wanted the child, she could have it. If not, he didn't care. "Sarah, I don't care what you and he decide," Daniel said wearily. "I just want to get through the next 2 weeks in peace." In 2 weeks, the team from the classified project would be coming for him. Sarah frowned. 2 weeks. Daniel's hand clenched. He'd said too much. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "I want you to take some time off work and stay with me," Sarah said, dismissing his comment. For the next 3 days, Daniel did everything Sarah asked. He had to admit, a small, irrational part of him was starting to feel hopeful about this baby. When Sarah was pregnant with Ethan, she had stayed on base, telling him over the phone that her duties were too important for her to come home. At the time, he had felt such a pang of sympathy for her. But now he knew that while he was home alone, Michael had been with her. Daniel scoffed internally. Everything he was doing for her now, Michael had surely done the same for her then. The day she was discharged from the hospital, Sarah seemed lost in thought. Daniel knew what was on her mind. "I'll go," he said. "You can have him pick you up." Her guard had come by every day at the hospital, always whispering things to her when he thought Daniel couldn't hear. He knew they were talking about Michael. It was a miracle she'd lasted 3 days without running to him. Sarah snapped out of her daze. "Let's go." She reached for his arm to steady herself, but Daniel subtly shifted away. They walked out of the hospital, one behind the other. Just as they passed through the main doors, a car came speeding towards them from the left. With no time to get out of the way, Daniel instinctively shoved Sarah clear. He was hit with a sickening thud and thrown through the air. His body slammed against a nearby tree, the impact so violent he felt like he might split in two. He recognized the car. It was Sarah's, and through the windshield, he could see Michael's face. In his last moment of consciousness, he saw Michael leap from the car and pull Sarah into a tight embrace. When Daniel woke up, Sarah was sitting by his bedside while a nurse administered for. The nurse, seeing he was awake but silent, finished her task and left the room. It was only then that Sarah spoke. "Michael was too upset," she said. "I had the procedure." The room was deathly still. Daniel felt he could hear the cold fluid from the bag dripping into his bloodstream. He had never wanted to lose this child, no matter how complicated the timing was. And yet, for Michael, she had killed it. She had killed his child. Daniel's eyes flew open. He seized the hand that was stroking his cheek and sank his teeth into the soft flesh of her palm. Sarah flinched and violently pulled her hand away. "Ow, are you insane?" she cried, cradling her hand. "I'm not the one who's insane," Daniel retorted. "Michael tried to kill me in broad daylight, in front of hospital. He's the crazy one." He pushed himself up, his eyes bloodshot with rage. He was so agitated that blood began to back up into his foreline. "Michael didn't mean to," Sarah said, her voice low and firm. How could she say that? Michael had intentionally run him down, and she was defending him. "I'm calling the police," Daniel said, his eyes cold and dead. "I'm reporting him for attempted murder. He needs to pay for what he did." Sarah's frown deepened. "Don't be ridiculous. This is a private family matter, not something for the police." Daniel said nothing, just continued to stare at her. Sarah's expression faltered as she realized he was completely serious. "You can try," she said coolly, "but let's see if anyone is brave enough to take your case." "What is that supposed to mean? You'd abuse your power for him? You'd throw away everything you stand for, all for him?" Daniel felt like he didn't even know her. It was clear now that her only principle was Michael. She would sacrifice anything for him. They stood in a tense standoff until one of her guards burst into the room. "Director, it's Researcher Carter. He's on the roof of the main building. He says he's going to jump. You need to come quickly." Before the guard could even catch his breath, Sarah was gone, sprinting out of the room. The guard shot a guilty look at Daniel before hurrying after her. Daniel expressionlessly ripped the four from his hand and followed them up to the roof. The wind whipped across the rooftop. Michael was standing on the narrow ledge, looking as if a strong gust could send him plummeting. "Michael, don't be a fool. Come back over here," Sarah called out, her voice steady, but a slight tremor betrayed her fear. "You blame me, don't you?" he shouted over the wind. "You blame me for hitting him, and you blame me for the abortion." All Sarah cared about was getting him off that ledge. "I don't blame you," she yelled back. "I promised you I wouldn't keep the baby, and I understand why you did what you did. Please, just get down from there." Daniel stood in the stairwell doorway, hidden from view. When he heard Sarah's words, a wave of pain so intense washed over him that his legs gave out. He slid down the wall to the floor. She knew Michael had hit him on purpose. She had known all along, and for Michael, she had sacrificed their child. "You might not blame me, but what about Daniel?" Michael cried. "I know I wronged him. Let me pay for what I did to his child with my own life." As he spoke, he took another step forward. A gust of wind caught him off balance, and he teetered on the edge, about to fall. "No!" Sarah lunged, grabbing his hand at the last second. Her momentum carried her forward, and she was half over the ledge herself, desperately holding on to him. Daniel's heart constricted. To save Michael, Sarah was willing to throw her own life away. Daniel got to his feet and walked slowly toward the ledge. 1,000 wild thoughts raced through his mind. In the end, he reached out and grabbed hold of Sarah's legs, anchoring her. With his weight as a counterbalance, she found her footing and managed to haul Michael back over the railing to safety. "Daniel," she breathed, her heart pounding. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. Had he heard? "Let's get a divorce, Sarah," he said, his voice flat. "It will be better for both of you." Sarah's grip on Michael's arm tightened. Why was he always so insistent on a divorce? She couldn't understand what he was so unhappy about. "This is the last time I'll say it. A divorce is out of the question." She had worked too hard to become director. Countless people were watching her every move, waiting for her to slip up. The slightest hint of scandal could ruin her career. A divorce was unthinkable. Sarah and Michael left together. Watching them walk away, so close, Daniel felt nothing but a vast, empty wasteland inside him. "If you don't agree, I'll file for contested divorce," he said. Even though he would soon be gone, with his identity erased, he couldn't bear the thought of being legally tied to her. "That's enough," Sarah snapped, brushing past him. "Is this really the time for you to be throwing a tantrum?" Daniel stood numbly on the roof for a long time, the wind whipping around him. When he finally came back down, he went straight to the nurse's station and discharged himself against medical advice. A nurse tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't be dissuaded. Daniel found a pay phone and dialed 911. "Hello, I need to report a crime. I was the victim of a hit and run yesterday morning in front of Mercy General Hospital." The operator on the other end asked, "Do you know the name of the person who hit you?" "Michael Carter." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, then a slight hesitation. "I'm sorry, sir, but that incident was already investigated and ruled an accident yesterday." The line went dead. Slowly, Daniel hung up the phone. So that was Sarah's principle. She would distort the truth itself to protect Michael. Suddenly, Daniel felt exhausted. He didn't have the strength to fight anymore. All he wanted was to live out his last few days here in peace. He went home and slept the rest of the day, only to be jolted awake by Ethan. The boy had never shown Daniel an ounce of respect. He shoved the bedroom door open, jumped onto the bed, and started bouncing on the pillows right next to Daniel's head. "Hey, wake up, lazybones. Uncle Michael is here. Get up and make us some food." As if that wasn't enough, Ethan then threw back the covers and started ruffling Daniel's hair. "Get off me," Daniel said, pushing his hand away. "If you're hungry, have Michael cook for you. Now, get out." Ethan stared in disbelief. Daniel had been in the hospital for days. Shouldn't he be happy to see him? Before, anytime Ethan even mentioned being hungry, Daniel would drop everything and rush to the kitchen to make him something. To be honest, Ethan was actually craving Daniel's cooking. But the way Daniel had just spoken to him made him angry. He jumped back on the bed. "Uncle Michael can't cook. He's a scientist." "I don't care. You have to make dinner." Daniel's face was like stone. He picked Ethan up, unceremoniously deposited him in the hallway, and slammed the door shut. He ignored the boy's shouting, pulled the covers over his head, and tried to go back to sleep. Sometime later, he vaguely smelled something burning. He could hear Michael's and Ethan's voices, muffled, through the door. "Uncle Michael," Ethan's voice trembled. "Do we really have to do this?" Michael's reply was soft. "Don't be silly. You're the one who said you wanted a new daddy, remember?" Ethan sounded like he was about to cry. "But what if Mommy finds out?" Your mommy won't find out, Michael soothed. She's been deployed. It'll be a long time before she comes back. He gently stroked the boy's hair. Did you not mean it when you said you wanted me to be your dad? No, I meant it. I like you the best, Uncle Michael, Ethan said, his tears subsiding. Thick smoke was now pouring in from under the door, filling the room. Daniel fought to stay conscious, but he'd already inhaled too much smoke. He crawled to the door and tried the handle, but it was locked. Hearing him fumbling with the knob, the people in the hall seemed to panic. Open the door. Ethan, I can't hear you. Daniel pounded on the wood, but from the other side, Ethan shouted back defiantly. No, I want to open it. I don't want you to be my dad. If you die, then Uncle Michael could be my dad. Ethan's voice faded into the distance. Daniel couldn't believe it. The child he had raised was actually trying to kill him. As his consciousness began to slip away, Daniel bit down hard on his own lip, the sharp pain momentarily clearing his head. He ripped the sheets from his bed, twisted them into a makeshift rope, and forced himself to the window, trying to suppress his terror. He was on the second floor. He began to lower himself down, but halfway to the ground, the fabric tore. He fell the rest of the way, landing hard in the bushes below. The pain was so intense, he couldn't get up. He looked up and saw a woman in a military uniform leaning over him. Her lips were moving, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. He only felt a sense of warmth as she held him. Meanwhile, far away, Sarah felt a deep sense of unease. She couldn't stop thinking about the look on Daniel's face when he'd told her he was filing for divorce. Daniel was being completely unreasonable. If it wasn't for all the years he'd spent dutifully caring for her family, she never would have put up with his behavior. She just didn't understand what had gotten into him, why he had changed so drastically. She had to supervise a training exercise for a new batch of recruits. When she went home to pack her gear, she found Daniel in his room, sleeping with the covers pulled over his head. It felt strange. In the past, he had always been the one to pack her bags before deployment. This time, Michael had packed for her, and he'd forgotten many of the things she usually took. She didn't blame Michael, though. She blamed Daniel for ruining a perfectly good arrangement by throwing these childish tantrums. It was the same this time. Before she left, she had specifically asked Michael to tell Daniel she would be away for training, but in all the days she'd been gone, Daniel hadn't called once. Sarah's resentment toward him deepened. The weather was sweltering, and the intensity of the boot camp only increased with each passing day. Everyone could see Director Vance's mood worsening, her expression growing darker. The new recruits didn't know why, but the veteran soldiers had their suspicions. Sarah's husband was well known around the base for being the perfect spouse, not just for how well he cared for her family, but for how attentive he always was to her. This training wasn't classified. Usually, on a deployment like this, her husband would call every few days or at least drop off some home-cooked meals with the gate guards for her. But this time, 2 weeks had passed with complete silence. Everyone assumed the director and her husband were fighting. No fight between a husband and wife lasts forever, one of her colleagues advised. It's obvious this is bothering you. Just give him a call. If you offer an olive branch, I'm sure he'll take it. Sarah took the advice to heart. It made sense. Daniel had been temperamental lately, and even though he'd mentioned divorce, she knew he could never really go through with it. Fine. If he was too stubborn to call her, she would call him and smooth things over. The thought made her feel instantly better. It had been a while since she'd heard his voice. He would probably be thrilled to get a call from her. That afternoon, after lunch, Sarah went to the communications center to call home. But Daniel was always the one who called. She realized with a jolt that she couldn't remember her own home phone number. She tried several combinations, but none of them connected. She frowned, an unfamiliar feeling of anxiety creeping up on her. She hung up the phone, deciding to just wait for Daniel to call her. Just then, the phone rang. She was the only one in the room, so she picked it up. It was Ethan. I need to speak to my mom, he said. My mom is the director. A smile touched Sarah's lips. Sweetheart, what is it? Are you being a good boy for your father? Mommy, Ethan sobbed into the phone. I miss you. When are you coming home? Why are you crying? Sarah asked, concerned. Daddy, before Ethan could finish, the phone was taken from him. It was Michael. Sarah, how are you doing? I hope it hasn't been too difficult. Make sure you're not overworking yourself. His voice was so gentle and warm. Sarah felt a small pang. She realized she hadn't spoken to Michael in a while, either. Her thoughts lately had been consumed by Daniel and his stubborn, simmering anger. She hadn't spared a thought for Michael at all. She felt a little embarrassed. I'm fine. How are you? And how is he? A sudden, inexplicable guilt made her stop. She changed the subject. Is everything all right at home? Michael's reply was as warm as ever. Everything's fine. My departure date for the fellowship has been set, but I'm going to wait until you're back before I leave. Okay, she said. After they hung up, Sarah felt a twinge of regret. She should have asked to speak to Daniel. Then she remembered what Michael had said about the fellowship. That spot was originally Daniel's, but she had pulled strings to give it to Michael instead. She decided she would buy Daniel a nice gift when she got home to make up for it. While Michael was away, she could afford to be a little nicer to Daniel. After all, she knew his moods were just a reflection of how much he loved her. The day her training exercise concluded, Sarah didn't head straight home. Instead, she went into town and bought an expensive watch. She tucked the box safely into the inside pocket of her coat. The thought of the surprised and happy look on Daniel's face when he opened it made her feel an unfamiliar warmth. She didn't know why, but for the first time in a long time, she was genuinely excited to see him. Her driver was taking her back to the compound. Sarah had planned a nap during the drive, but she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, all she could see was Daniel's face. They hadn't even reached the main gate of the compound, yet when her driver spotted Michael standing there with a suitcase. The driver pulled over, and Sarah opened her eyes to see him waiting. "Are you leaving today?" she asked. Michael's face lit up when he saw her. "I was afraid you wouldn't be back in time to see me off," he said, moving to embrace her. But Sarah hesitated, taking a small step back. Michael's smile vanished. They both got in the car. The driver couldn't help but notice the strange tension in the air. Usually, Michael was much more talkative, and Sarah's demeanor was always softer when he was around. But today, they barely exchanged a word the entire drive to the airport. The driver started to get out, but Sarah told him to wait in the car. She would see Michael off herself. But when they got to the security checkpoint, Michael was denied entry. "Sir, there's an issue with your ticket. You won't be able to board the flight," the agent said calmly. Michael was incredulous. "That's impossible. My travel was approved by the directorate." Sarah felt a muscle in her jaw twitch. She glanced at the clock on the wall. In an hour, Daniel would be starting dinner. The agent, growing impatient with Michael's arguing, made a quick call and then handed the phone to him. "Michael, we've received an anonymous tip accusing you of academic plagiarism. The board has decided to suspend your fellowship pending a full investigation. Revoked. Sent back for investigation." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He staggered backward, collapsing against Sarah, who finally reached out to steady him. Sarah frowned. "We'll sort this out when we get back." "It was Daniel," Michael mumbled, clutching her sleeve. "It had to be him. He's the one who reported me." Sarah took him back to the lab, but it was already closed for the day. Anxious to get home and see Daniel, she drove them both back to the compound. The moment she opened the front door, before she could even speak, Ethan ran to her and threw his arms around her legs. "Mommy, you're home." Ethan cried. Her parents were also crying, tears streaming down their faces. "Oh, Sarah, you're finally back." That wretched Daniel. He decided he was tired of taking care of us, so he set fire to the house and ran off. The gift box slipped from Sarah's hand and fell to the floor. She couldn't comprehend what they were saying. "What do you mean, he ran away? Daniel loved her. He would never leave." Ethan was still sobbing. Sarah grabbed him by the collar and pulled him to his feet. "Was it you? Did you do something to make him angry?" Her expression was terrifying. Ethan had always been afraid of his mother, and now he was so frightened he immediately stopped crying. "Why are you blaming the child?" her mother interjected. "It's obvious that ungrateful man is the one at fault." Mrs. Vance had never bothered to hide her contempt for Daniel, and Sarah had never corrected her. But now, Sarah's eyes were dangerously dark, and an icy aura surrounded her. Her voice was low, but it carried a threat that made them all flinch. "Daniel would not run away," she said. "Did you all do something to drive him out?" "That had to be it. There was no other way he would have left her. He was so gentle-hearted. He must have just run off for a few days to cool down. She would find him and bring him home." Ran away, as if he'd grown to hate her. Impossible. He was just throwing a tantrum. She would find him and calm him down. As Sarah turned to leave, Michael grabbed her arm. "It's dark out. Where are you going?" Sarah seemed to register for the first time that Michael was still there. She stared at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" His grip on her arm loosened. She was accusing him. Why are you so concerned about him?" he asked, a new fear in his voice. "Don't tell me you've actually fallen in love with him." Tears welled in Michael's eyes. Sarah pushed his hand away and walked out without another word. Night had fallen. She got in her car, determined to find Daniel. But then it hit her. She had absolutely no idea where he would go. She pulled the car over to the side of the road, her mind a chaotic mess. All she knew was that she had to find him. She had to. And for the first time, she was struck by how little she actually knew about him. She had no idea where he might have gone, who his friends were, or where he would turn for help. As his wife, she knew nothing about him. Sarah slammed her fist against the steering wheel in frustration. Much later, she finally drove home. She heard clattering sounds coming from the kitchen. For a second, her heart leaped. She hurried over, ready to call his name. Daniel. But the man who turned to face her under the kitchen light was Michael, his eyes red and puffy. He was holding a handful of dry pasta. "Sarah, you're back," he said. "You must be hungry. I'll make you some pasta." Sarah came back to herself, walked silently into the living room, and sat down. Daniel had been an excellent cook. He moved around the kitchen with a quiet confidence, never making panicked, clumsy sounds. A distant memory surfaced in her mind. When she and Daniel first married, he couldn't cook at all. She was the one who had asked him to learn so he could take care of her parents. She remembered how she had once hoped Michael would propose to her, but he'd said his dream was to devote his life to science, and that marriage was not for him. But Daniel, she recalled, had been a brilliant researcher too. For her, he had managed to juggle a demanding career and all the responsibilities at home. Her parents were notoriously picky eaters, but Daniel had spent 6 months teaching himself to cook, going from burning eggs to creating meals that even they couldn't complain about. He had never complained, not once. He handled everything so competently that she had started to take it all for granted. He wasn't always stoic, though. The day she went into labor, Daniel, as her husband, was needed to sign the consent forms. He had dropped everything and rushed to the hospital the moment he got the call. What had she felt for him then? There must have been some affection, but it had been eroded over the years by her sense of obligation to Michael. She had brought the baby, Michael's baby, to the hospital and laid him in the bassinet next to her bed. And she had told Daniel he was theirs. A small cry of pain from the kitchen. Before Sarah could even process it, her body was already moving. She ran into the kitchen to find steaming broth all over the floor and Michael clutching a hand that was already red and blistering. All thoughts of Daniel vanished. She grabbed Michael's wrist and thrust his hand under the cold tap. "I'm sorry," Michael mumbled, looking down at the floor. "I'm so useless. I can't even make a simple bowl of pasta." At that moment, an opportune thought of Daniel popped into her head. It was the last time they had been close. Oh, right. It was the day he'd told her she made him sick and demanded a divorce. "Sarah," Michael said softly, "he's really gone. You never loved him. Maybe it's for the best. Just let him go. Stop looking for him. I can do everything he did for you," he continued. "Ethan is our son. Let's just be a family, the three of us. Let's just be happy together, okay?" He wrapped his arms around her. After a long moment, Sarah let out a deep sigh. "Let me put some cream on that burn." The ointment was cool, and her touch was gentle, just as it had always been. Michael watched her as she tended to his hand. "I can give up the fellowship," he said. "You should file the divorce papers." Sarah didn't reply. Her hands paused for a fraction of a second before she resumed applying the ointment. "I'll think about it after I find him," she said finally. Up north, Daniel had been at the new facility for almost a month. He was already getting used to the dry climate. The research base was Spartan, but it had all the necessary equipment and an extensive library. His days were full and productive, a welcome change after the first week, which he'd spent recovering in the infirmary. His colleagues at the base were good people, all of them brilliant minds who had given up their former lives to contribute to the nation's progress. Daniel found a sense of peace in the steady rhythm of his new life. It was a good life, and he felt content. It was a Saturday, and the lab was down for routine equipment maintenance. So Daniel went to the library first thing in the morning. He found a seat by the window where the morning sun fell across his desk, gentle and warm. "Daniel, it's our day off. What are you doing here so early?" a soft female voice asked from beside him. Daniel put down his pen and looked up. "Dr. Hall, I could ask you the same thing." Dr. Lauren Hall smiled and sat down across from him with her own books. After their brief exchange, Daniel returned to his work, meticulously taking notes. As she watched him, her mind drifted back to the day they had first met. She'd never expected their first meeting to be under such dramatic circumstances. She had found him lying in the bushes, barely conscious, his breathing shallow and weak. It was she who had gotten him to the infirmary. He had suffered from severe smoke inhalation and had been unconscious for 2 days. She happened to be in his room when he finally woke up. She watched as his eyes fluttered open, his expression shifting from confusion and suspicion to a glimmer of hope. She never asked him what had happened. She could see that he had endured a great deal of pain before coming here. All she knew was that from the moment she looked into his eyes, she was lost. Perhaps this was what love at first sight felt like. "Dr. Hall, I knew I'd find you here," a male colleague called out, breaking the silence. Daniel instinctively looked up at the man who had just entered. Lauren quickly composed herself, her expression neutral by the time his eyes met hers. "What is it, Mark? Is something wrong?" she asked. "The director is looking for you. It's about that data set your team submitted. He thinks we might have a breakthrough." Her colleague was beaming, his excitement infectious. Daniel overheard and smiled as well. Lauren considered for a moment. "Daniel, you should come with me," she said. He had done a significant amount of work on that particular data set. He didn't object, simply rising and gathering his books with a clean, efficient motion, ready to follow her. His gaze was direct and professional, yet when he looked at her, Lauren felt her own breath catch in her throat. In the director's office, Lauren had Daniel present their findings. The director was clearly impressed. "This is the right path," he said. "Continue down this line of inquiry. I'll report your progress to the Oversight Committee." Back home, Sarah had been unable to find any trace of Daniel. Meanwhile, Michael had been suspended from his job pending the outcome of the plagiarism investigation. Michael was in a foul mood and had become incredibly clingy. Sarah had sent her parents back to the retirement home, but Ethan, of course, still had school and had to stay. "Mommy, where did Dad go?" Ethan asked, a guilty edge to his voice. He knew the truth about the fire. Michael had assured him that Sarah wouldn't blame him, but lately, Ethan had started having nightmares about Daniel. He was only 5 after all. In his dreams, the fire lit up the entire sky. He didn't know what had happened to Daniel, only that he was gone, and the anxiety made him physically ill. Sarah found herself completely overwhelmed, trying to care for both Michael and a sick child on her own. When Michael dropped yet another dish with a startled cry, Sarah's patience finally snapped. "Michael, can you please try to be more competent?" Daniel used to manage everything on his own without any of this drama. Michael's lip trembled as he stared at her, his eyes full of hurt. "Sarah," he whispered, "you never used to be like this." He wanted to ask her if she'd been thinking about Daniel, but he stopped himself. He didn't need to ask. He already knew the answer. Michael wasn't an idiot. Her distraction these past few weeks had been painfully obvious. Sarah sighed, her anger dissipating. Okay. I'm sorry. It was my fault." The next day, Sarah went to Daniel's old lab, hoping someone there might know where he had gone. The lab's director recognized her immediately and ushered her into his office. "Director Vance, I'm glad you came. I was supposed to deliver this to you personally, but I wasn't sure of your schedule." The director pulled a manila envelope from his desk drawer and handed it to her with a grave expression. A muscle in Sarah's forehead began to twitch uncontrollably. All the anxiety that had been building inside her for weeks rushed to the surface. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Her hand felt stiff and clumsy as she reached for the envelope. The director's face was filled with pity. He assumed she must have known that she was just struggling with denial. "It's Daniel's official death certificate," he said gently. "I know how close you two were. He was a model spouse, a true credit to the service. But we can't bring him back, Director. Please accept my deepest condolences." Sarah clutched the envelope, walking out of the building like a ghost. She sat in her car for a long time, staring at the plain brown paper as if she could see through it. A death certificate. It wasn't possible. They said he ran away. Happy to be dead. She sat motionless in her car all afternoon before finally tearing open the envelope. She read the name, Daniel Miller, over and over. A single, thin sheet of paper announcing that the man she loved was gone. Darkness fell. Sarah didn't move until Michael came down with Ethan to find her. "Sarah, why are you just sitting out here? Ethan's been waiting for you since he got home from school." Michael trailed off. He had never seen her look like this before. She was completely shrouded in an aura of despair. Her eyes were empty, looking through him rather than at him. He saw the official-looking paper with its red seal clutched in her hand, and his own heart began to beat faster. "Daniel," he started, "is he?" Daniel was dead. That meant he could finally take his rightful place as her husband. Composing himself, he continued, "Since Daniel is gone, Ethan needs someone to look after him. And I can't just keep living in your house without." After the plagiarism scandal broke, even though Michael hadn't been back to the lab, he'd heard the rumors. And with him living at her house, the neighbors had started to talk. Sarah's gaze fell back to the death certificate. Daniel was dead. She had to arrange a funeral. She would have Ethan hold a vigil. Daniel had adored that boy more than anything. She pushed past Michael and headed upstairs, completely ignoring him. Panicked, he spoke more bluntly. Sarah, Daniel being dead is a good thing. You never loved him. We could go file for a marriage license tomorrow. Sarah turned and looked at him, her eyes filled with a coldness he had never seen before. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah moved fast. By the next day, a memorial was set up in their living room. Because of her position, she was only permitted to hold the service for 2 days. Daniel's colleagues from the lab came to pay their respects. Sarah was surprised to see how many friends he had. When a few of them saw Michael standing there, they shot him looks of contempt. A bit late for all this, isn't it, Director? One of them said sarcastically. Daniel's not even cold in his grave, and you've already moved someone else in. Daniel thought he was his best friend, another muttered. And the guy stole his research and his wife. If I were Daniel, I'd come back from the grave and haunt him. Sarah stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, and didn't say a word in her own defense. That evening, after the last of the guests had left, Sarah stood before Daniel's portrait. She grabbed Ethan and forced him to his knees. No, I don't want to. Ethan wailed. My knees hurt. Grandpa, Grandma, Uncle Michael. Ethan sobbed, but Sarah held him firmly in place. His crying only intensified. Her parents, who had been biting their tongues all day, finally intervened. Ignoring Sarah's thunderous expression, her mother swept Ethan up and carried him to his room. He's dead and gone, she snapped. Leave my grandson out of it. Sarah stared into the eyes of the man in the black and white photograph, an unbearable pain gripping her heart. So this is how they treated him when she wasn't here. Seeing that she was in no condition to work, her commanding officer gave her another 3 days of leave. Most of Daniel's things had been destroyed in the fire. Sarah carefully collected the few items that remained, taking them out each day to look them over. Michael stood in the doorway and watched her, his expression unreadable. Sarah, dinner's ready, he said, breaking her reverie. Sarah gently put the items away. A thought seemed to occur to her, and she frowned. Michael, she said, I think you should go back to your own place. Michael froze, his hands clenching behind his back. What do you mean? I've been thinking. You're not suited for this kind of domestic life. And with you living here, the neighbors are starting to talk. It's not a good look. I can do it, Michael said quickly. Anything Daniel could do, I can do. Besides, if I leave, who will look after Ethan? He had planned to wait a few days before bringing up the topic of marriage, but her listless grief was starting to scare him. It was as if she intended to mourn Daniel forever. At dinner that night, her father said, Sarah, your mother and I, and Ethan, we need someone to look after us. Michael is a good man. You two should just go down to the courthouse and make it official. Before Sarah could respond, Ethan jumped up and down, clapping. Yay, Uncle Michael is going to be my daddy. Sarah's face hardened. Ethan, is that how I raised you? Your father has only been dead for a few days, and you're celebrating? She had never taken this tone with her family before. The shock silenced them all. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Sarah sat by the window again, holding the small box of Daniel's things. Michael came in, carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Sarah, I know you're grieving. I miss him too, more than you know. I'll leave tomorrow. We can forget about us. I just hope you'll still let me see Ethan. He poured a drink for himself and one for her. Sarah's mind was a mess. She knew she owed Michael something, but Daniel had given her everything. He was gone now. She couldn't betray his memory. With that thought, she downed the whiskey in one go. Michael, I'm sorry, she said. You can see Ethan whenever you want. As for us, we can go back to how things were. Michael looked down, hiding the cynical glint in his eyes. Like before, that meant she wanted to keep him around, but without any official commitment. Sarah always wanted to have her cake and eat it too, but things weren't going to be that simple. He kept refilling her glass, and she kept drinking until her face was flushed and her speech was slurred. In her drunken state, she clung to Michael, but it was Daniel's face she saw. She kept murmuring Daniel's name, promising she would be good to him, begging him not to go. A cynical smile played on Michael's lips, but he murmured back, I'm not going anywhere, as he led her to the bed. He pushed her down and kissed her. Daniel, I'm so sorry, she slurred. It was all my fault. I'll be good to you from now on, I promise. I'll do whatever you want. If you don't like Michael, I'll never see him again. If you want a child of our own, we can have another one. Michael gritted his teeth in silent fury. The more she tried to push him away, the tighter he would hold on. He turned off the light, his movements becoming rough and desperate. The next morning, he woke before Sarah but stayed in bed, waiting. Ethan was now used to Michael taking him to school, so he knew the boy would soon be knocking on the door. Knock, knock. Uncle Michael, it's time to... Ethan pushed the door open and stopped dead. He saw his mother and Michael wrapped in each other's arms. He stood frozen in the doorway, completely bewildered. Hurry up and get Ethan to school, her mother called from the hallway. Thinking Michael was slacking off, she shouted loud enough to wake Sarah. But when she came to the door and saw the scene inside, she gasped and quickly covered Ethan's eyes. Good heavens! Get dressed, you two! In front of the child, she exclaimed. And after all that talk yesterday about not getting married, I think you'd better make this official, and soon. Sarah's head was pounding. Flashes of the previous night came back to her, and her expression turned to ice. In the end, Sarah and Michael got married. Ethan got his wish and could finally call Michael Dad. They had a marriage license, but there was no wedding reception. Sarah's excuse was that it was her second marriage, and it wouldn't be appropriate to make a big fuss. Michael was secretly furious, but he held his tongue. The investigation into his plagiarism had concluded. Out of deference to Sarah, he wasn't fired, but his suspension was made indefinite. Married life with Sarah was nothing like he had imagined. She was a different person, rarely coming home, leaving him alone in the big house night after night. For the first week or so, Michael made an effort. He would pick up takeout from a nice restaurant and pass it off as his own cooking. The Vances and Ethan were delighted, constantly complimenting his culinary skills. But as the weeks turned into months, he realized Sarah was, for all intents and purposes, living on the base. He stopped pretending. He started eating his own meals out and coming home with nothing for the others. Ethan ate lunch at school, leaving only her parents at home during the day. Mr. Vance, accustomed to being waited on, reacted to Michael's refusal to cook the same way he had with Daniel. He took off his shoe and threw it at him. But Michael was not Daniel. You old fool, he sneered. If you've got enough energy to throw your shoe, you've got enough energy to cook your own damn food. I'm not your servant. Mr. Vance was so enraged he could barely breathe. You fraud. You were pretending all along. I'm telling Sarah. Go ahead, tell her. She's my wife now. What are you going to do about it? How many years do you have left anyway? This sent Mrs. Vance into a fit of rage, and she began screaming every foul curse word she knew. The Vance house descended into daily chaos, much to the entertainment of the neighbors. Michael stopped driving Ethan to school, forcing the boy to walk there himself, often without breakfast. You're mean. I want my other dad back, Ethan wailed. Michael showed him no sympathy. I'm your dad now. You want Daniel? Have you forgotten what happened to him? You're the one who killed him, remember? The accusation terrified Ethan into silence. He stared at Michael as if he were a stranger, whispering under his breath, You're not my daddy. I want my daddy. Sarah hadn't been home in over a week. She had just filed her after-action report and was about to head home for the night when one of her guards ran up to her, looking panicked. Director, it's Ethan. He's missing. What do you mean missing? Did he skip school? Sarah's first thought was that the boy was acting out, playing hooky. No, ma'am, the guard said breathlessly. The school called. He told his teacher he was going home for lunch, but he never went back. The color drained from Sarah's face. She rushed home immediately. Michael wasn't there, only her parents. Her parents were about to launch into a fresh round of complaints when Sarah cut them off, asking where Ethan was. He's at school, her mother said. Sarah knew then that he was truly missing. The entire family searched for him, finally finding him unconscious by the riverbank. Sarah sent her parents home and took Ethan to the hospital. The diagnosis came back. He had fainted from hypoglycemia brought on by severe malnutrition. When Sarah brought Ethan home later that evening, Michael was there. He greeted them with a bright smile, reaching out to ruffle Ethan's hair. The boy flinched away, hiding his face in Sarah's shoulder. Ethan, you can't be skipping school like that, Michael said cheerfully. You had us all worried sick. Now, come on in and wash up for dinner. Her parents were already home when he arrived, so he had prepared an elaborate meal in anticipation of Sarah's return. Sarah looked at the feast spread across the table. Is this what you eat every night? She asked. Michael didn't quite understand her tone. His eyes shifted nervously. Well, I heard you were coming home, so I picked up a few special things. He gestured to two of the dishes. I made these myself, though. I hope you like them. Do you cook for them every night? Sarah pressed. Of course, Michael said, a little too quickly. And your cooking has made our son so malnourished that he fainted from hunger? Seeing her anger, Michael quickly apologized and promised it would never happen again, that he would take proper care of everyone. Sarah was too tired to argue. She didn't understand how Michael had changed so much. She had been assigned a new mission, overseeing a supply convoy to a classified base up north. The departure was scheduled for the next day, but with everything going on at home, Sarah decided to leave a day early. The convoy drove for 3 days and nights before finally reaching their destination. The facility was top secret and heavily fortified. The guards at the gate meticulously checked her identification before allowing the convoy to pass. Sarah was supervising the unloading of the trucks when, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a person she never expected to see again. Her head snapped in his direction, her eyes flooding with tears. The man standing there, clear as day, was Daniel. He was carrying a heavy stack of books. From a distance, Dr. Lauren Hall saw him and jogged over to meet him. "Dr. Hall, I'm returning your books. Thank you again for lending them to me," Daniel said, passing the stack to her. She took them with a smile, saying it was no trouble at all, but inwardly her heart was racing. She found herself wishing he would ask her for more favors, anything to give them more chances to interact. Over the past few weeks, her initial admiration for him had blossomed into a full-blown crush. She couldn't help but find her eyes drawn to him whenever he was near. Daniel was brilliant. Even here, surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the country, his talent stood out. And Lauren knew she wasn't the only one who had noticed. Just last week, she had accidentally stumbled upon a researcher from another team cornering him in the stairwell, clearly asking him out. Lauren had hidden around the corner, unseen. She watched as Daniel politely but firmly turned the other woman down. He'd said he wasn't interested in dating, that he wanted to devote all his energy to his work. Lauren had taken his words to heart. She did her best to push down her own growing feelings, content to be his friend and colleague, to support him in his work. He was always the last one to leave the lab, completely absorbed in his projects. But she had noticed that sometimes his focus would drift. In those moments, he would stare out the window at the old aspen tree, a profound sadness in his eyes. She was falling in love with him, but she was too afraid of being rejected to confess her feelings. And so, she never dared to ask about the source of his hidden sorrow. "I have several more of those journals in their original German. If you'd like to borrow them," Lauren offered, knowing his passion for reading. "Really? Are you sure it wouldn't be too much trouble?" Daniel asked, his eyes lighting up. Lauren felt her cheeks flush. "Not at all. I'll bring them by tomorrow. We should get some lunch," she said. Daniel smiled and agreed, and they started walking toward the mess hall. Suddenly, Lauren's foot slipped on a loose stone, and she pitched forward. Daniel's reflexes were quick. He shot out a hand, grabbing her arm and pulling her back against him to steady her. Her forehead bumped against his chin, and before either of them could say anything, a hand grabbed her other arm and violently yanked her away from Daniel. Lauren felt a rush of air as a hand swung past her ear, the force of the slap knocking her to the ground. "Daniel, what are you doing here? And who is this woman?" Sarah's chest was heaving, her eyes blazing. She shot a venomous look at Lauren on the ground before turning her furious gaze on Daniel. She looked for all the world like a wife who had just caught her husband in the act of cheating. Daniel stood frozen. How was she here? His heart began to pound in his chest at the sudden appearance of the one person he thought he would never have to see again. A small cry of pain from Lauren brought him back to his senses. He quickly knelt and helped her to her feet. "Lauren, are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Her lip was bleeding, and her forearm was scraped raw where she had caught herself. Against her pale skin, the injuries looked startlingly vivid, but Lauren barely registered the pain. All she could focus on was the warmth of Daniel's hand supporting her elbow. "Daniel, what was that death certificate? Why did you leave me? What are you doing here? And who is she?" Sarah reached for him again, but Lauren stepped between them, her expression glacial. Daniel gave Lauren's arm a gentle tug. She turned to look at him, and he gave her a small, reassuring nod. Lauren stepped aside. The gesture, small as it was, sent a fresh wave of fury through Sarah. Her own husband was protecting this other woman from her, looking at his own wife with such caution. "Daniel, this isn't a funny joke. Do you have any idea how long I've been searching for you? How could you do this to me?" Daniel looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Why were you looking for me?" Sarah frowned. "You're my husband." Daniel cut her off. "No, I'm not. Besides, Daniel Miller is dead." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She fought down a wave of panic and reached for him, wanted to pull him away from the other woman. Why was he standing with her? Sarah was his wife. "What are you talking about? You're standing right here." Sarah insisted, reaching for him again. Daniel took another step back. You saw the death certificate. That means Daniel Miller is dead, he said. You say you were looking for me? Why? Did the Vance family suddenly find themselves in need of a free housekeeper? He gestured around them. This is a secure facility. I don't know why you're here, but I'm never leaving. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but each word landed like a hammer blow on Sarah's heart. He took Lauren's hand and turned to leave, but Sarah moved quickly to block their path. By now, Lauren had pieced it together. The broken man she had found in the bushes, the source of his silent suffering, it was all because of this woman. Lauren had been biting her tongue, but she couldn't hold back any longer. The two women looked ready to come to blows. Daniel stepped between them, pulling them apart. As he did, he caught sight of the scrapes on Lauren's arm, and, with a sudden surge of anger, he shoved Sarah away from them. Sarah stared, stunned. He had chosen her. He had chosen the other woman. Sarah's mission was only to oversee the supply delivery. She was scheduled to leave the next day. But now that she had found Daniel, she stayed for 3 more days. Every single day, she waited for him outside the laboratory building. Daniel knew she was there, but he walked past her each time without stopping, without a word. Sarah's presence was too conspicuous to go unnoticed. After 3 days of her vigil, rumors began to circulate that the visiting director was there for Daniel. When Daniel caught wind of the gossip, he went to the base commander and filed a formal harassment complaint against her. With no other choice, Sarah left the base. The moment she returned to her post, she submitted a request for a transfer. Her request was approved. In a gesture of goodwill, her superiors even granted her permission to bring her family along to the new assignment. Of course, Sarah had no intention of bringing Michael. She couldn't let Daniel find out they were married. Michael was the reason he had tried to leave her before. She wasn't going to make that mistake again. She would not lose him again. Daniel's life settled back into its peaceful routine. The only difference was Lauren. Ever since Sarah's visit, Lauren had started staying late at the lab, often being the last to leave right alongside Daniel. One evening, Daniel was working late as usual. After making the final entry in his logbook, he stood up and the world went black. He fainted. When he came to, he was lying in a bed in the infirmary and 4 in his hand. He could feel the warmth of the fluid entering his veins. Lauren walked in carrying a small bag. When she saw he was awake, she rushed to his bedside. You're finally awake, she said, her voice full of relief. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his forehead. You still have a bit of fever. You need a rest. I've already cleared you for 3 days of medical leave. Your health is your most important asset. You can't keep working around the clock like this. You'll run yourself into the ground. Her voice was laced with genuine concern. Daniel smiled up at her. I understand. Thank you, Lauren. At the sound of her first name, Lauren's breath caught, and the tips of her ears turned bright red. Daniel noticed. Suddenly flustered, he looked away. Lauren carefully tucked the blankets around him. I'll go get the doctor, she said, quickly leaving the room. The doctor arrived a few moments later, checked Daniel's vitals, and gave a few instructions, with Lauren listening intently to every word. Soon, they were alone again. Lauren seemed unable to sit still, first adjusting his bed to make him more comfortable, then pouring him a glass of water, then peeling an apple for him. She came to visit him in the infirmary every day for the next 3 days. After he was discharged, Daniel returned to his work with his usual intensity. He wasn't oblivious to Lauren's feelings for him, but after everything he had been through, he no longer knew how to navigate the world of love and relationships. Lauren didn't push. She was content to simply be near him, a quiet, steady presence. When he became too engrossed in his work, she would gently remind him to take a break. When he forgot to eat, she would bring him his favorite meal from the mess hall. He often worked late into the night, and she would stay late too, just to walk back with him. Day by day, her quiet devotion began to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. Even a man with a heart of stone would have been moved by her kindness. Perhaps sensing the shift in him, Lauren grew bolder. She started waiting for him outside his dormitory in the mornings so they could walk to the lab together. But one morning, when Lauren arrived, she found she was not the only one waiting for him. Sarah was there too. They say it takes 21 days to form a habit. Lauren's constant presence had become a comforting part of Daniel's routine. He had even started unconsciously looking for her under the big aspen tree, her usual waiting spot, the moment he stepped out of his building. Today was no different. He spotted her right away. I brought you a bagel, she said, her manner easy and natural as she handed him a small paper bag. He took it with a smile. They were just about to head off when they saw Sarah. "What are you doing here?" Lauren asked, unable to hide her annoyance. Sarah spared her only a passing glance before addressing Daniel directly. "I've been reassigned," she announced. "You said you were going to spend the rest of your life here. Well, I'm here to spend it with you." She spoke with heartfelt conviction, but Daniel just laughed. "You're here for me? Then what about Michael? I thought he was the love of your life." Sarah faltered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's you I love. It's always." She was cut off by a man's voice shouting her name. Daniel looked past her and saw Michael running towards them. Michael jogged up to join them, but stopped short when he saw Daniel, his face paling as if he'd seen a ghost. You're supposed to be dead. Sorry to disappoint you," Daniel said, his face a stony mask. He thought of the fire, of the helplessness he'd felt listening to Michael's voice through the door, of the terror and pain of his escape. Michael gripped Sarah's arm tightly, steadying himself. "Daniel," he said, forcing a smile. "Long time no see." Sarah pulled her arm from his grasp, and a look of pure devastation crossed Michael's face. Daniel's head began to ache. Why did they have to show up here, in his new life, his peaceful life? He never wanted to see either of them again. Daniel took Lauren's hand and turned to walk away. Sarah started to follow, but Michael grabbed her arm, holding her back. She frowned at him. "Why are you here?" She had never told him about her transfer. He must have found out some other way. Sarah was relentless. Every day, she would go to the lab to wait for Daniel, and every day, Michael would go to the lab to drag her away. It didn't take long for the entire facility to be buzzing with the news. The newly transferred director was aggressively pursuing one of the researchers. And what's more, she had brought her husband with her. The gossip quickly turned ugly, painting Daniel as a homewrecker. Daniel finally had enough. One day, he left work early to confront Sarah as she waited for him outside. "Your behavior is disrupting my work and my life," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "I need you to stop. Starting tomorrow, do not wait for me here again." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, to tell him again that he was the one she truly loved. But before she could get the words out, Michael appeared as if from nowhere. "Daniel, please, I'm begging you," Michael cried, loud enough for several passersby to hear. "Leave her alone. Sarah and I are married. Please, just give me my wife back." Daniel fought back a wave of nausea. "Enough," Daniel said through gritted teeth. "I want both of you to stay as far away from me as possible." After that day, Sarah stopped waiting for him, and Daniel, wanting to avoid any more drama, began to distance himself from Lauren as well. He just wanted to be left alone to do his work, free from gossip and complications. Lauren eventually confronted him about his sudden coldness. "Lauren," he told her honestly, "I know you like me, but I'm just not in a place where I can be in a relationship." Daniel's life returned to its quiet, solitary rhythm. But Michael, it seemed, was not finished with him. "Daniel, you need to come see this," a colleague yelled. "Someone put up a poster about you on the community bulletin board." Daniel's face was dark as he stood before the sheet of paper, which was covered in accusations about his supposed affairs. Lauren pushed her way through the small crowd that had gathered and ripped the poster from a board. "This is all lies," she declared. "Daniel is not that kind of person." Daniel didn't have to wonder who had written it. He didn't even bother confronting Michael. The whole situation was just absurd. How could he have been so blind? How had he ever considered Michael a friend? Daniel took the crumpled poster from Lauren and addressed the onlookers. "Whoever put this up, if you have something to say, say it to my face." No one spoke. After a long moment of silence, Daniel ripped the poster into tiny pieces. "Fine," he said. "Since no one wants to own up to it, we'll consider the matter dropped. But if this happens again, the person responsible and I will be having a conversation in the commander's office." In the few months he'd been at the base, Daniel had already made significant contributions, earning the respect of his peers. The crowd slowly dispersed. Sarah stooped down and picked up one of the scraps of paper, her face an emotionless mask. That night, she confronted Michael. "Was this you?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Michael denied it, of course, but Sarah knew his handwriting. "What? Are you feeling sorry for him now?" he spat. "Fine, I did it. What of it? It's not like I was lying. Don't think I don't know why you really transferred here. You knew he was alive, didn't you? You were planning on leaving me behind. Well, it's not going to be that easy." Michael's eyes were bloodshot. "You will never have him. And besides, from the looks of it, he has plenty of other women interested in him. He doesn't need you." Michael let out a harsh laugh. Sarah's face was like ice. She slapped him hard across the face. "You hit me," he sputtered. "You hit me for him. Watch your mouth, Michael," Sarah warned. her voice trembling with rage. She wouldn't stand by and let him speak about Daniel that way. For him, Michael repeated, his voice dangerously low. He suddenly lunged at her, his hand raised to strike. "Have you lost your mind?" Sarah cried, shoving him hard. Michael stumbled backward, lost his footing, and fell hard, sharp, tearing pain exploding in his groin. Blood began to pool beneath him, soaking through his pants. Sarah stared in shock for a moment before snapping into action and calling for a medic. The fall had been a bad one. Michael had done serious damage. The doctor's diagnosis was grim. The injury had caused permanent nerve damage. He would be impotent for the rest of his life. Sarah tried to console him, reminding him that they already had a son, so it didn't really matter. "Sarah, are you even human?" Michael choked out. While a cloud of misery hung over the infirmary, the atmosphere back at the lab was jubilant. Daniel and Lauren's project had achieved a major breakthrough. To celebrate, the base command organized a social mixer and dance for all the personnel to let off some steam. At the dance, Lauren couldn't take her eyes off Daniel. She found it impossible to hide her feelings for him. The more he tried to keep his distance, the more drawn to him she felt. Suddenly, the lights overhead began to flicker and buzz. Lauren immediately started making her way toward Daniel on the other side of the room. But before she could reach him, the entire building was plunged into darkness. The crowd stirred, and in the confusion, Lauren was jostled and lost her bearings, unable to see where Daniel was. A scream pierced the darkness. "He's bleeding. Someone's been stabbed." A voice, twisted with madness, shrieked, "You deserve to die, Daniel. You deserve to die." It was Michael. He stood behind Daniel, a small paring knife in his hand, which had just plunged deep into Daniel's back. The crowd descended into chaos. Just as suddenly as they had gone out, the lights flickered back on. Daniel lay on the floor, his face a deathly white, a pool of blood spreading around him. Michael was quickly restrained, but the blood just kept pouring from Daniel's wound. Lauren stumbled through the crowd and fell to her knees beside him. She pressed her hands against the wound, desperately trying to staunch the flow of blood, but it was no use. Her tears streamed down her face, falling onto his. Weakly, Daniel lifted his hand as if to touch her cheek, but fell back to his side, limp. "Lauren," he whispered, "Why? Why are you crying?" Lauren watched, trembling uncontrollably, as his eyes drifted shut. Later, outside the operating room, Lauren sat huddled in a corner, her eyes fixed on the red light above the door, a silent, unblinking vigil. When Sarah arrived, she found Lauren still sitting in the exact same position, her clothes stained dark with Daniel's blood. A sharp, physical pain shot through Sarah's chest. So much blood. When Lauren saw Sarah, she leaped to her feet and slapped her hard across the face. The blow caught Sarah by surprise, making her stagger backward. Lauren, consumed by a grief-stricken rage, began hitting her again and again, a relentless barrage of fists, until finally, someone managed to pull her away. "This is your fault. All of it," Lauren screamed. "Everything that happened to him. It's all because of you." Sarah spat a bit of blood onto the floor, but said nothing. Michael had been taken into custody. He was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and committed to a state mental hospital. If she could trade places with him, Sarah would have done it in a heartbeat. An eternity later, the red light above the operating room door went out. The door swung open, and a surgeon emerged. Both women rushed toward him. "How is he? Doctor, please, how is he?" The surgeon said something, but the words didn't register. Sarah, unable or unwilling to understand, asked again. "We did everything we could," the surgeon said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I'm sorry. He didn't make it." A pain so sharp and blinding ripped through Lauren's heart that her legs buckled. Her vision dissolved into static, a high-pitched, ringing screaming in her ears. With a cry of pure anguish, she launched herself at Sarah again. But this time, Sarah didn't fight back. She just stood there, lifeless, accepting the blows. Another 10 years passed. Ethan Vance was now a young man. He placed a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums on the ground and bowed deeply before the grave. The headstone bore 2 names, Daniel Miller and Sarah Vance. He looked at the photo of the man who had raised him, and just as he had done every year, he gently wiped the dust from his face.